All right, welcome back. We want to take you live back down to the courthouse now. Joe Dieters has just begun his opening statement. Here is the latest from the courthouse right now, live.
To believe, what piece of evidence to believe, and things of that nature. That being said, a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, the university had an uptick in violent crime, not just on campus, but around the campus area. And they warned students about the violence that was occurring, armed robberies and things of that nature. They asked them not to walk by themselves. And they increased police presence, not just on campus, but they signed an agreement with the city of Cincinnati to be able to go out beyond the campus and do some patrolling. And frankly, generally speaking, these are positive steps to keep the students safe. Tenzing was one of the officers hired by the University of Cincinnati Police. The University of Cincinnati Police is a university police department. They go through the same training and procedures as municipal police departments. On Sunday afternoon, July 19th, 2015, when most students are home for the summer and people were going about doing their usual weekend activities, it was a very warm day that day. Tenzing was on patrol and he was stopping motorists for no front license plate. It was this type of stop that put him in direct contact with Sam DuBose. It was a legitimate traffic stop. Even though Sam DuBose was able to produce the front plate, and you'll see the video of this, it was still lawful for Tenzing to ask him to step out of the car when he could not produce a valid driver's license. Up to that point, everything was fine. And by the way, unknown at that time to Tenzing, or even later, days after this occurred, it was discovered that Sam had some amount of marijuana in the car. That was legitimate. What Tenzing did next was not legitimate. It was murder. It was totally contrary to the training he had received. It was totally contrary to the rules and regulations of the University of Cincinnati Police Department. It was totally contrary to the laws in this country concerning a justified shooting. And it was totally contrary to the oath he had taken as a police officer. Everyone agrees that this is what happened up to that point. Both sides would agree to that. Now comes the truth about what happened next. And then come the lies. As Sam DuBose placed his left hand on the steering wheel of the car he was driving, he then put his right hand on the engine key to start the engine. This is obviously after the stop. Tenzing grabbed the seatbelt of DuBose with his left hand, and with his right hand drew and fired his .40 caliber Sig Sauer pistol. He fired directly into the head of Mr. DuBose. The coroner will tell you that Sam DuBose was immediately and completely incapacitated. As the bullet severed his brainstem, all his bodily functions were shut down. He died within seconds. Mr. DuBose's foot was in the process of coming off the brake and moving to the accelerator when he was shot. It would have collapsed like the rest of his body and it was probably a post-mortem reflex that caused his foot to depress the accelerator and caused the car to move forward. You know, many dozens of people are shot and killed by police in the line of duty across the United States. We have one or two to several here in our city every year. I would say that 99% of them, the person shot was either reaching for a weapon, pointing a weapon at an officer, or what appeared to be a weapon at the officer. And in nearly every one of these cases, the officer was 100% justified in firing his weapon. And it's because the officers involved in those shootings believed that the suspect posed a threat of serious physical harm either to the officer or to others. In this case, not only was there no weapon in or about the car being driven by Sam DuBose, there was never any claim by Tenzing that he thought he had a gun or was reaching for a gun, or that Sam made any move that made Tenzing fear for his safety. All Sam DuBose did was try to drive away from this traffic stop. The following true facts you will see captured on Tenzing's body cam. You heard about it in voir dire. This little camera sits here and records. And thank God we have a body cam. You will actually see Tenzing grabbing the seatbelt with his left hand and trying to keep DuBose from driving away. As soon as DuBose reached for the ignition switch with his right hand, Tenzing was already going for his gun. You will witness how Tenzing pulled his gun and how he had it moving towards the head of Sam DuBose prior to the car even moving an inch. You will see when the car slowly begins to move. At that point, Tenzing's gun was already pointed at the head of Sam DuBose. Less than 1 second later, the car moved a little more than a foot, and Tenzing shot Sam DuBose in the head, causing his death within seconds. Now comes Tenzing's lies. His version is unsupported by any other witness or any other evidence. When interviewed 2 days later by Cincinnati Police Department's homicide unit, after he had viewed the tape, he went into great detail how he had reached the car through the steering wheel with his left arm in an attempt to turn the ignition of the car Mr. DuBose was driving off. By the way, that's completely contrary to any of his training. And when you watch the tape, you're going to know that that is false. You're going to see or hear how he claims his left arm got tangled in the steering wheel. False. How the car sped up with him stuck. False. How he was being dragged along the pavement by his left arm. False. How he claimed his body was almost pulled parallel to the ground. False. His feet were dragging along the blacktop. False. How he believed he was going to get pulled under the car as it sped up the street. Again, false. How then, at that point, as he claimed he was hanging on for dear life, he pulled his pistol from his holster and aimed it at Mr. DuBose. False. He claimed at this point, as he was being dragged, that all he could see of Mr. DuBose was his head, due to Tenzing's head being at the level of the driver's side window. Again, it's false. You know, in many cases that we handle, intent's one of the hardest things to prove to a jury. And it's because in our jury instructions, the judge says you can't take a cross-section of someone's brain to see what they were thinking when they did this. Judge Sunderman, sorry, Judge Shanahan, we had a Judge Sunderman here. Judge Shanahan will instruct you about the definitions of mental state in this murder case. Basically, she will tell you that murder in this case is purposely killing another. The evidence will show that this case is amazingly simple in terms of proving intent. The reason that it is simple here is because you will hear from Tenzing's own mouth that he intentionally shot Mr. DuBose in the head. The evidence is going to show you that this tragic case, this murder, was totally unwarranted, was completely intentional, and was truly unjustified. I ask that you pay close attention to the facts of this case, that you follow Judge Shanahan's instructions as you swore to do. And if you do that, I submit that you will find Ray Tenzing guilty as charged of murder. Thank you. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Peters.
Thank you.
Mr. Matthews.
May it please the court, Mr. Gibson, Mr. Dieters, Mr. Pietmeyer, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to take this beginning opportunity here to remind you of what Judge Shanahan told you and what Mr. Dieters just told you as far as opening statements. They are not evidence. The evidence that you will consider and use to reach your verdict in this case will come from that witness stand and any exhibits that are admitted during the course of this trial. I just heard Mr. Dieters describe the videotape, which is going to be the central piece of evidence in this case. And I will tell you, I think I must have been watching a different tape, because he stood here and told you about every lie that he sees in that tape, and I would submit to you that nothing that he just described to you is what is actually on that tape. And I would ask you to keep an open mind and listen to all the evidence as we proceed in this case. Generally, and Judge Shanahan, in her opening remarks to you about what we're doing up here, said that concise opening statements are what we are supposed to give at this point. And generally, I follow that rule. I give a very short opening statement. But because of the importance of this case and because of the misinformation that is out and about and that has just been supplied to you by Mr. Dieters, I feel it necessary to go into some great detail about what happened on July 19th, 2015. First and foremost, as you know from our voir dire examination, this is not a whodunit case. There's no question that Ray Tenzing fired the shot from his police-issued service weapon that resulted in the death of Samuel DuBose. There's no doubt, and there's not going to be any question, that Ray Tenzing discharged that weapon intentionally. However, he discharged that weapon not with the idea that I'm going to kill Sam DuBose, not with the idea that I am going to wound Sam DuBose. He discharged it with the concept that as a police officer, when I am threatened, I have been trained to stop the threat. His intention was to stop the threat that Sam DuBose was posing to him at the time he discharged the weapon. And I'm going to go into the great detail here in a few minutes about what was happening on July 19th up there on Rice Street, where we just were a little bit ago. But first, you're going to hear testimony in this case from Santa Ono, the former president of the University of Cincinnati, and that will be by way of a videotaped deposition, which was given sometime in July before Dr. Ono left for British Columbia. Dr. Ono is going to tell you about the increase in the crime problem that was happening on the campus of the University of Cincinnati and in the surrounding neighborhoods of the University of Cincinnati. Mr. Dieters alluded to that. UC had a crime problem that was affecting their students, and they decided to do something to address it. They've been attempting to address it in many different ways for a long period of time. Some of the ways that Dr. Ono will tell you about was that they increased cameras both all over the campus and all around the campus and the surrounding neighborhoods. They increased the lighting. They started a night ride program so students could call if they wanted a ride to get back to campus or to their dorms or apartments. Another thing that they did was that they hired off-duty Cincinnati police officers to patrol the neighborhoods around in the areas around campus. When that didn't work, or when they weren't getting sufficient coverage, they greatly and dramatically increased the size of the University of Cincinnati Police Department. Another thing they did was, and you'll see it through Dr. Ono's testimony, Dr. Ono and the former chief of police of the city of Cincinnati, Jeffrey Blackwell, wrote a letter to the judges of Hamilton County Court of Common Pleas and asked them, or told them in the letter, that they were going to be watching what happened with cases that involved defendants who had victimized University of Cincinnati students. The implication from that letter, and you'll be able to read it, but the implication from that letter was that we're watching you, judges, because we want you to come down harder on these people that are victimizing our students. As I just mentioned, they greatly increased the size of the police department. The concept there was that we're going to, and Mr. Dieters alluded to an agreement that was signed between the City of Cincinnati and the University of Cincinnati, whereby the University of Cincinnati police were granted authority to patrol the entire city of Cincinnati. As a practical matter, the concept of that agreement was that the UC police officers would patrol the area around campus, the various neighborhoods, Coreyville, Fairview Heights, University Heights, Clifton, all the areas, the neighborhoods around the university campus where a lot of university students lived. UC police officers were going to patrol those areas. The resulting increase in manpower made it so that UC Police Department actually created beats. That is, they drew areas in the neighborhoods around the campus, and they assigned officers to patrol those particular areas. And the point of that was that we're going to flood the area. You're going to hear testimony, I think, from some of the UC police officers who testify that the chief at the time, Jason Goodrich, who is no longer with the UC Police Department, but he adopted a policy of what's been referred to as a no-fly zone. In other words, he instructed his officers who were patrolling out and around the UC campus to stop anybody that they had a justifiable reason to stop, and let them know that we're out here, we're patrolling this area. We don't want the bad guys around here harassing our students and robbing them and whatever else they were doing to the UC students. We want the word to get out that you don't come around the University of Cincinnati. If you want to create trouble, go somewhere else. The evidence will be that Chief Goodrich passed it down through the ranks to the patrolman, and Ray Tenzing's title was law enforcement officer. He was a low man on the totem pole in the sense that he was a police officer. He wasn't a sergeant, he wasn't a lieutenant, he wasn't a captain. The word came down through the ranks to the patrol officers, go out and write traffic citations. And the evidence will show that the number of traffic tickets that were written after this policy went into effect dramatically increased. They dramatically increased because the officers were told to do that, and because there were a considerably greater number of police officers from the UC Police Department out writing tickets. The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that some officers on the UC Police Department, some of the ranking officers, thought that this policy is crazy, that we shouldn't be out here writing all these tickets. But the officers like Ray Tenzing had no say in that. And in fact, when some of the officers below the rank of chief indicated that they thought that that policy was not a good policy, the chief would come in behind them and say, guys, you're doing great, go out and get more. And the officers did that. So that's the background of what was going on around the campus of the University of Cincinnati with the police officers. And Ray Tenzing was one of them. He did his job. He did what he was asked to do. Comes July 15th, 2006, or July 19th, 2015. Ray reported for duty that day at 3:00 p.m. It was just an ordinary Sunday in July. It was a hot day. Mr. Dieters indicated most of the students are gone from campus. I would think that that's accurate, except that there are a lot of UC students who live year-round in the neighborhoods around the UC campus that the UC Police Department was protecting. Additionally, you had the great increase in the number of police officers. They didn't lay those officers off in the summer or tell them not to come to work. They expected them to come to work and do a job. Ladies and gentlemen, you will see a video of Ray Tenzing on July the 19th, 2015, which encompasses 3 separate traffic stops that he was involved in prior to his encounter with Sam DuBose that day. Those 3 stops were stops where he activated his body camera. The first stop will be a stop on McMillan Street where he stopped an automobile for no front license plate, but he also had information from running the plate that the driver of that car was under suspension, or the registered owner was under suspension. He stopped the car. He found that the fellow driving the car, there was a driver, his wife, 4 kids in the back seat, none of them in child seats or safety belts. He stopped the car. He handcuffed the driver of that car. Before he got him out of the car, he put him in the rear of his cruiser. He discovered that, in fact, his computer information was correct. The driver was under suspension. Not only that, the driver had some open traffic warrants, or open warrants, which called for him to be arrested. You will find, ladies and gentlemen, that Ray Tenzing, during that traffic stop, ended up writing that driver a ticket for driving under suspension. He recited him on the open warrants rather than arresting him, and he allowed, rather than towing his car, he allowed that driver, and the driver's wife also did not have a valid license, so he allowed them to call somebody and come and pick up the car. He couldn't let the unlicensed drivers drive away. He could have towed the car. But Ray Tenzing doesn't have it in for anybody. He allowed them, they cooperated with him, he allowed them to call somebody and drive that car away. The next stop you will see is where he operated as a backup officer to another police officer, again on McMillan Street. That's a very short video. There's nothing remarkable about that. The most remarkable of the 3 videos is one that occurred, a traffic stop that Ray made at 5:58 p.m. on July the 19th. His encounter with Sam DuBose was at 6:31 p.m. But at 5:58 p.m., Ray observed a car operated, well, the car it had no front license plate on it. In fact, the front license plate was not attached to the front of the car. It was on the dashboard inside the car, which is not what Ohio law requires. Ray Tenzing ran the license plate that was on the rear of the car and found that the automobile was registered to a woman whose license was under suspension. Based on that, he initiated a traffic stop. This was in Bellevue Park, which is up in the area of the University of Cincinnati. Ray approached the vehicle, found it was operated by a female African-American. The car was registered to a female African-American. His computer told him that the registered owner was under suspension. He asked for a driver's license There was a male African-American in a passenger seat. He asked for identification from that individual. They both produced identification. He determined that the female operating the vehicle was not under suspension, that she had borrowed the car from the owner of the car, who actually was under suspension. He took their IDs, and you'll see this on the video. He took the two IDs, he went back to his cruiser, ran them in his computer, found there were no wants or warrants on either of the individuals. The driver's license was valid. He returned to the car. He handed the identifications back to the driver and to her passenger, instructed the driver that the license plate belongs on the front of the car, not on the dashboard. You need to tell the owner to put it on the front of the car. He didn't issue a citation. He said, "Have a nice day." The lady operating the car told Ray, "Have a nice day." That was the end of the encounter. Everybody went on their own way. Another interesting part of that that video is at the end of it, Ray talks to another UC officer had shown up on the scene, and Ray talked to that officer about having dinner at 6:45 p.m. So fast forward here a few minutes to 6:31 p.m. This stop I just described was 5:58 p.m. No problems. A few minutes later, Ray Tenzing is sitting in his cruiser on East Hollister facing Vine Street. He'll tell you his intention was to cross Vine Street to West Hollister and go back up to another part of his beat. As he was sitting there, he will tell you that he looked to his right. He saw a Honda Accord coming down the hill from the direction of UC with no front license plate on it. When that car passed him, and he'll tell you that when I saw that car go past me, I saw a red hat and somebody with a red shirt on. I couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. But the car went past him. He was able to see the rear license plate on the car. He ran that rear license plate, and this is where the rest of the story comes into play here. He ran that license plate that was on the rear of the car, and lo and behold, it comes back. The car comes back registered to a female, Deshandra Reed, and it indicated that her license was under suspension. So Ray Tenzing decided, I'm going to initiate a traffic stop. There's no front license plate. That's not a big deal, but the car is registered to somebody who's under suspension. I'm going to find out what's going on here. He pulls out behind the car. It goes down Vine Street Hill where we were this morning, turns left onto Thill Street, and Ray will indicate that the car put on a turn signal, and he was going to make a traffic stop. He flipped on his overhead lights as the car turned left onto Thill. No problem with making the left turn onto Thill, because he thought, Ray will tell you, I thought that was good because it got us off out of the traffic on Vine Street. The car turns left onto Thill Street, and rather than pull over, which is what people ordinarily do when there's a police officer behind them, they pull over. Well, this car didn't pull over. So Ray Tenzing called out on his radio the location where he was, Vine and Thill. He indicated that the car that he was attempting to stop was slow to stop, were his words. He used the yelper on his siren a couple of times to make sure that the driver of the car knew that he was behind him. The car continued up Thill Street, past Loth, which was the first street we saw there off to the right when we turned onto Thill Street, up to Rice Street. The car turned right on Rice Street and finally pulled over to the curb. In the meantime, Officers Linden, Schmidt, and Kidd. Officer Kidd was I think a 9-year veteran of the UC Police Department. He was riding in a cruiser with Officer Joel Linden Schmidt, who was what's called an OIC, or OIT, Officer in Training. Linden Schmidt was new to the UC Police Department. He was riding with a field training officer. They heard that Ray was making a traffic stop. They heard the slow to stop, and they heard the Vine and Thill location. They will tell you that we knew that Vine and Thill is not the best part of town, and they determined to back Ray Tenzing up at that point. The evidence will be that when a police officer hears the slow to stop terminology, they know that that's an indicator that something's not quite right. The driver who is slow to stop is not actively fleeing from the officer, but at the same time, he's not complying with the officer. And that could be for any number of reasons. The driver could be attempting to hide contraband in the car. He could be attempting to throw contraband out of the car. He could be attempting to pick his own place to make a stop and then to get out and run. Whatever it was, when an officer hears that slow to stop terminology, they react. They know something's not quite right. So what happens? The car stops on Rice Street. Ray Tenzing and you'll see in the video that when that car stopped, there's a car parked a short distance in front of it on Rice Street, and the car that Ray was attempting to stop, the wheels are pointed straight ahead. They're not cocked to the right or cocked to the left, they're pointed straight ahead. And I'll tell you why that's important here in a second. But the bottom line is, Ray Tenzing exited his cruiser, approached the driver's side door, and discovered that it was not a woman operating the car like it was registered to, it was a male. And it turns out it was Sam DuBose. He asked, and you'll hear the whole conversation, and I'm not going to tell you word for word because I can't repeat it totally accurately, but the gist of the conversation was, are you the owner of this car? And he said, yes, I am. The driver did. And Ray said, well, it's registered to a female. And he said, well, that's my wife. Ray asked him over the course of their conversation, probably 7 or 8 different times in different ways, do you have a driver's license? And the driver never did answer. At first, Ray told him he was being stopped for no front license plate. And at that point, the driver, who we now know was Sam DuBose, turned the car off, took the keys out of the ignition, opened the glove box and said, it's in here, and started fumbling around trying to get the license plate out of the glove box. Ray Tenzing told him, don't worry about that, it belongs on the front of the car. I'm not worried about that. Do you have a driver's license? DuBose could not produce a driver's license, and you'll hear him on the video running Ray all over the place, trying to divert his attention, not responding about whether or not he in fact had a driver's license. Ray Tenzing, because of his experience and the number of traffic stops he's made, he was pretty sure that Mr. DuBose was under suspension at that point. But Ray, while he's questioning Sam DuBose about whether he's got a license, he sees on the floorboard between Sam DuBose's legs a bottle, and the bottle had liquid in it. Ray at that point is beginning to think that maybe, well, first of all, he says, what's that? And Sam DuBose reached down, handed him the bottle, and you'll see the bottle, or see a photograph of it. It said gin on it, and it had liquid in it. Ray at that point is beginning to think, well, perhaps there might be some kind of impairment here. He might be DUI. But and so he set that bottle on the roof of the car, intending to come back to it and find out what the deal was with Sam DuBose. He never got that chance. He continued to ask Sam DuBose, do you have a driver's license? Finally, he said, until I can figure out who you are, go ahead and take your seatbelt off for me. And at that same time, you'll see on the video, Tenzing is reaching for the door handle to DuBose's car, and he opens the door. When he does that, DuBose, with his left hand, places it on the door frame, pulls the door shut, and with his right hand, he takes the keys that he had removed from the ignition, jams them back into the ignition, starts the car, and in one motion, drops his hand to the gear shift, puts it in drive, and mashes the accelerator. Ray Tenzing feels like, and this is a tactical error on his part, he feels like I can stop him from leaving by reaching into the car and grabbing the keys out of the ignition. Ray reached into the car with his left hand, and as he reached into the car with his left hand, and you'll be able to see when we slow this video down for you to a frame-by-frame view, you'll be able to see DuBose take his left hand, put it over Tenzing's left forearm, and pin his forearm to the windowsill, basically, the driver's side windowsill. At the same time, Ray's left hand is pushed up against the steering wheel. While all this is going on, DuBose is mashing the accelerator, and Tenzing's body is being twisted, and you'll be able to see it twisted, and he's going down, And he's not grabbing for a seatbelt to try to keep DuBose from getting away. He's grabbing for a seatbelt to try to keep himself from getting thrown on the ground and thrown under that car. And you'll be able to see on the video how Tenzing is going down. You'll be able to see his foot, how close he came to actually being run over. You'll be able to see the video pointing at the sky, and you'll be able to see where he ended up and how he ended up on the ground after he was dragged by this car. And we may have an issue about what's the definition of being dragged. Do you have to be dragged 20 feet before it's called being dragged? Or is the instant that you perceive that you're being twisted and you're going to go down, that's when Ray Tenzing felt that he was being dragged. He knew, because he was starting to go down, he knew this wasn't going to turn out well. The evidence will be that as that was happening, Officers Linden, Schmidt, and Kidd were coming to back him up, and they were rounding the corner onto Rice Street. And they will tell you that they saw they saw Ray reach to open the door. They knew he was going to be getting DuBose out of the car. They knew they had to hurry. And they'll tell you, I think Officer Linden Schmidt, who was driving, will say that I was busy backing up, parking, and I didn't see exactly what happened. Kidd will say my view of whether he was dragged or not was blocked by Ray Tenzing's cruiser, but they will both tell you, as will Ray Tenzing, that when all this happened, the car was not slowly rolling away. They heard tires squealing, they heard acceleration, tires squealing, and then they heard a gunshot. And Ray will tell you that as he was going down, he drew his weapon, and the only thing, it was instinctive. What he did was draw his weapon, he fired, and you'll be able to see from that video, he's leaning down like this, his hands up like that, and he fired to stop the threat to try to save his own life or keep himself from being seriously injured. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that after that occurred, you'll see on Officer Linden Schmidt's body camera video where Ray ended up, which is quite a distance down or up the hill there on Rice Street. It's not where this traffic stop started out. You also understand that when DuBose pulled his car to the curb, it was pointed straight ahead. Had he involuntarily left the scene of the scene there, he would have driven straight into Alicia Napier's car, who was parked up just a few feet in front of him. Rather, he had to turn his car to the left to get around her car, and in doing so, that's when he started the spinning of Ray Tenzing and started Tenzing on his way to the ground. I think, ladies and gentlemen, that you will find that the car went to the left, took Tenzing to the ground, and it was a rapid acceleration. It wasn't a slow rolling away. Mr. Dieters indicated to you that Sam DuBose didn't have a gun. There wasn't any weapon involved here. Well, I will concede that Sam DuBose did not have a gun. He did not ever indicate he had a gun, but I will not concede that he did not have a weapon. He had a 3,000-pound car that he turned into a weapon and was attempting actively. He went from what I would call passive noncompliance by a slow stop to active resistance when he put his arm over Tenzing's arm to actually assaulting the officer when he mashed that accelerator and turned that car to the left and took off. And I will submit, ladies and gentlemen, that after you've heard all the evidence in this case, you'll find that Ray Tenzing's actions were justified, particularly when you hear the law that you were apply to the facts in this case at the end. There will be testimony here, ladies and gentlemen, that after this was all over, as you'll learn a couple things here. Mr. Dieters would have you believe that this all started over, this was all the result of not having a front license plate. In fact, you will find that Sam DuBose was transporting in his car and on his person a sum of cash in excess of $2,600, and he had marijuana in the car, and I'm not sure what the amount is, but it was somewhere over 200 grams and apparently less than 1,000 grams, but it was a quantity that was sufficient to get him charged with felony drug trafficking. Had Ray Tenzing had the opportunity to discover what Sam DuBose was up to on July 19th. Sam DuBose knew what he had in that car. He didn't want Ray Tenzing to find out about it, and he used every means available to him to try to escape that traffic stop. Again, when you've heard all the evidence, I think you'll find that Ray Tenzing's actions on July 19th were justified to save his own life or keep himself from being seriously injured. Now, during the course of this trial, you are going to hear testimony from some experts, a couple use of force experts and a video analyst. And they're going to tell you what they think this evidence, what conclusion you ought to reach because of what the evidence is going to show or what they've found during the course of their analysis of these events. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is that the decision in this case will rest upon the 12 of you individually and collectively. Judge Shanahan will tell you that you can believe all, part, or none of what any witness says, and she'll tell you with reference to the experts. You can believe what they say, you can use it to help you understand the facts, or you can discount it totally. But once again, I think once you've heard all the evidence, you will find that the state has failed to prove that Ray Tenzing is guilty of murder. Thank you.